Let's just start with this Afghan proverb. I know it's a harsh way to begin, but it immediately throws us into the world we're about to explore. A cultural landscape where a woman's place, and really her very humanity, have been the subject of an intense and often brutal fight. So today, we're diving into the dramatic and honestly often heartbreaking story of women's rights in Afghanistan. And what you'll see is that it's not some straight line of progress. It's much more like a pendulum, swinging violently back and forth between reform and repression for over 100 years. Okay, so first things first. To really get a grip on the fight for women's rights, we have to understand the system they were up against. And it's a system built on these incredibly deep-seated cultural beliefs, all reinforced by cold, hard economic realities. Right at the very core of this system is a concept called naqis-e-aql. Now, this isn't just some casual insult, it's a whole ideology. It literally frames women as lacking wisdom, making them naturally, fundamentally inferior to men. And this one idea becomes the justification for controlling just about every part of their lives. And, this way of thinking isn't just floating in the air, it's locked into place by economics. In a traditional farming society, wealth flows from 5 pillars: land, water, seeds, capital, and labor. The rules for who owns and inherits these things were basically designed to shut women out completely, leaving them with no economic power and totally dependent on men. But here's the thing, this story is anything but static. It is a constant, and I mean violent, push and pull. For every single step forward, there's been this powerful, often brutal backlash. This is that swinging pendulum of power we're talking about. Just look at this timeline. You can see the pattern so clearly. Back in the 1920s, you have King Amanullah pushing for modernization, while a conservative backlash kicks him out. Fast forward to the 70s, a Soviet-backed government forces through radical reforms. In response, the Mujahideen rise up in a holy war. And then, in 1996, that pendulum swings to its absolute most extreme point when the Taliban take over. And this comparison right here shows you just how massive that swing is. I mean, look at this. On one side, the 1920s. Modern schools for girls, women encouraged to wear Western clothes, even a women's magazine. Then you flip to the other side, the 1990s. Schools are shut down, work is forbidden, and women are basically erased from public life. These aren't just slightly different policies. They are two completely opposite worlds. So what's the thinking that drives a backlash that severe? Well, this quote from a Taliban governor gets right to the heart of it. It's an ideology that sees absolutely no room for compromise, no room for interpretation. In this view, society must bend to their rigid reading of religious law, not the other way around. Okay, so that brings up a really big question. How was this control actually maintained? Not just with decrees from the top, but in the day-to-day lives of women. What were the specific tools, the mechanisms, used to enforce this whole patriarchal structure? Let's take the story of a woman named Niyaz Bibi. Her case is a perfect and heartbreaking example of how this works. Her husband just says talaq 3 times, but files no papers, so she's in this legal limbo. He keeps harassing her, but when she goes to court for help, they tell her she needs 2 male witnesses. Of course, she can't find any. Her case gets dismissed, over and over. She is legally trapped with her abuser. The system itself becomes the prison. Control also works through this immense social pressure. A woman's virginity isn't just seen as her own personal business. Nope. It's treated as the literal symbol of her entire family's honor. This puts an unimaginable weight on women, where one mistake, or even just a false accusation, can bring complete ruin on her and everyone she loves. And this quote, wow, it's just stunning, really. It shows you how deep-seated and intense this pressure is. The thought of using a modern courier service like FedEx to mail ancient traditional proof of virginity across the entire world, it just highlights the powerful, almost surreal grip of this cultural practice. And then there's this number, just 6.9. According to the data, that was the average number of children born to an Afghan woman. Now, that's not just a statistic, right? It represents a life largely defined by reproductive duty, with women spending most of their adult lives either pregnant or raising very young children. And this quote, from a nurse who worked with Afghan refugees, might be the most chilling of all. It lays bare this fundamental belief about the value of a woman's life versus a man's. When a man's blood is seen as his life, but his wife is seen as replaceable. It has absolutely devastating consequences for women's health. But, and this is so important, this is not just a story of oppression. Afghan women have never, ever been silent victims. In the face of all of this, they have always found ways to resist, to speak out, and to fight back. So one of the most powerful ways they fought back? Poetry. A poet named Mahbub wrote this, speaking out against the tradition of arranged marriage. And these words, they aren't just sad, they're an accusation. This is a woman finding her voice and speaking truth directly to the injustice she's facing. Resistance also popped up in folk songs, often using this really sharp humor as a weapon. This line here shows a young girl's complete contempt for being forced to marry an old, impotent man. It's a way of publicly mocking the very people who hold power over them. But it didn't just stay in art and culture. That resistance got organized. It got political. And the most famous example of this is the Revolutionary Association of the Women of Afghanistan, also known as RAWA. Now, what's really crucial to get here is that RAWA's platform was about so much more than just women's issues. They understood that the fight for women's rights was inseparable from the fight for national liberation, the fight against oppression, and the fight to revive their own culture. It was this total vision for a new Afghanistan. And this is the voice of their founder, Mina, who was actually assassinated for her work back in 1987. Her words just perfectly capture the spirit of this resistance. It's a spirit of awakening, a realization that once you see the path, there's no going back. It's a declaration, and it's a legacy that continues to inspire. So what does all of this tell us? It shows that the struggle for women's rights isn't some side story in Afghan history. It's central. It's woven right into the fabric of it. We've watched this pendulum swing from reform to brutal repression and back again. And that history leaves us with one final, really vital question. As that pendulum inevitably continues to swing, who will get to define the next chapter?